Mama, please tell me, where is my baby?
It is better this way.
She sold my baby for 300,000 naira, her own grandson. And when I confronted her, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "It is better this way." That was the moment I understood that the woman who raised my husband was capable of things I could never have imagined. But what happened next? What happened next changed everything I believed about family, about betrayal, and about the God my grandmother used to pray to every single morning before the sun rose. Stay with me till the end of this one, because this story will shake something in you. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button now, because you don't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. My name is Ada Chukuma. And before I tell you what my mother-in-law did to me, I need you to understand who I was before that Tuesday morning in Enugu, because the woman I am now is not the woman I was then. My husband, Emeka, I met at a wedding in Owerri 6 years ago. He was tall, soft-spoken, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. And when he laughed, the whole room seemed to laugh with him. We fell in love like people fall into rivers, suddenly and without a way back to the shore. We married 2 years later, a small ceremony because his family didn't have much and mine had even less. I moved into his family compound in Enugu, a modest 3-bedroom bungalow with a rusted zinc roof and a mango tree in the front yard that his late father had planted. And there I met his mother, the woman I would come to call Mama Ngozi, though everyone in the neighborhood simply called her Mama. From the very first day, something about Mama Ngozi unsettled me. She was polite, yes. She smiled, yes. But her eyes never smiled with her mouth. She would watch me the way a hawk watches a chicken in the yard, patient, calculating, waiting. I told myself it was just the natural friction between a new wife and her mother-in-law, the kind every Nigerian woman warns you about before her wedding. My own mother had said, "Ada, no matter how sweet she is to your face, guard your heart." I laughed it off then. I would not laugh later. For 3 years, we tried for a child and nothing came. Mama Ngozi's patience grew thin. She would sigh loudly at family gatherings, mutter things about barren trees, just loud enough for me to hear, but soft enough to deny if confronted. Emeka defended me every time, but I could see the exhaustion building in him too. Not exhaustion with me, but with the constant tension in that house, like living inside a drum that someone kept striking softly, over and over, never loud enough to be an event, but never quiet enough to be peace. Then, in the 4th year, I became pregnant. I remember the day I told Emeka. He wept, a grown man, 6'2", weeping like a boy who had just been handed the moon. He held my stomach and spoke to it in Igbo, promises he made to a child that didn't yet have fingers or a name. And Mama Ngozi, for the first time since I'd known her, smiled at me with something that looked like warmth. I let myself believe things would change. I let myself believe the coldness between us was simply the residue of disappointment and that a grandchild would wash it all away. I was wrong, but I would not learn how wrong until much later, and by then the damage had already reached into the marrow of my life. My son was born on a Thursday in April. We named him Chidera, God writes. Emeka chose the name. He said, "Whatever happens to this boy, it is already written by God's hand and not by man's." I did not know then how prophetic those words would become. The first 6 months were the happiest of my life. Chidera had his father's calm eyes and my mother's stubborn chin. He rarely cried. He would lie in his cot and watch the ceiling fan spin for what felt like hours, completely mesmerized, completely at peace. Mama Ngozi doted on him. She carried him everywhere, sang to him in the evenings, and for a while I thought perhaps we had finally crossed into a new season, one in which the tension of years past could be forgotten. But there were things happening that I did not see. Things I only pieced together afterwards, like a woman gathering shattered glass in the dark, cutting her fingers on pieces she couldn't see coming. You see, Emeka's family had land, not just any land, a large plot at the edge of Enugu that had belonged to his late father, a plot that was already valuable but had just been marked for a new government road project that would run directly beside it, a project that would multiply its worth many times within the year. Emeka was the only son of his father's first wife, but his father, before he died, had another son, a son from an affair the family rarely spoke about, a man named Kelechi, older than Emeka by 6 years, raised elsewhere by his own mother, but never fully cut off from the family name. I had met Kelechi only twice before that year, both times brief, awkward, forgettable. He lived in Port Harcourt, worked in oil logistics, and rarely visited. I had no reason to think about him at all. That, I would learn, was exactly what he wanted.
It began with small things. Mama Ngozi asking strange questions about Chidera's birth certificate, about whether Emeka had registered him yet with the family land documents, about inheritance customs I didn't understand, and frankly didn't care about at the time. I was a new mother, drowning happily in sleepless nights and baby powder and the exhaustion of love. I brushed her questions aside as the odd obsessions of an aging woman. Then one evening in August, I overheard a phone call I was never meant to hear. I had gone into the backyard to bring in laundry before the rain came, and Mama Ngozi was on the veranda speaking low and fast into her old Nokia phone, the kind with buttons instead of a screen. I only caught fragments. If the boy is not there, then there is no dispute. The land goes only to Emeka's line if, no, listen to me, Kelechi will not stop until... And then she saw me standing there, a wet wrapper in my hands, and her face changed so fast, so completely, that it frightened me more than anything she'd said. "Ada," she said, too brightly, "you are back early." I said nothing. I went inside. But that night, I lay awake beside Emeka, staring at the ceiling, turning her words over and over like stones in my palm, unable to make sense of their shape. I did not tell Emeka. I don't fully know why. Perhaps I told myself I had misheard. Perhaps some part of me was afraid of what it would mean if I hadn't. Emeka traveled often for his work. He supervised construction projects for a firm based in Lagos, and that month he was sent to oversee a site in Warri for what was meant to be a short 2-week stretch. I did not know when I kissed him goodbye at the park garage that those 2 weeks would become the darkest chapter of my life. Now, here is where I need you to lean in, because what happened next is the kind of thing you read about and think, surely this cannot be real, but I lived it, every second of it. In the second week of Emeka's absence, Mama Ngozi began behaving strangely. She would take Chidera out for long evening walks, sometimes returning after dark, offering vague explanations like, "I took him to see my friend Ijeoma," or "we went to buy provisions." Some of those walks were real, harmless visits to her old friend down the road, but others, I would later learn, were something else entirely. Quiet trips to study a compound on the other side of the city, to memorize a route she might one day need to take in the dark, without anyone noticing she was planning anything at all. At the time, I had no reason yet to suspect the difference. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the Tuesday I will never forget as long as I live, I woke up at 6 a.m. to nurse Chidera, and his cot was empty. I want you to imagine that feeling, the particular horror of reaching into a space where your child should be and finding only cool, empty sheets. I did not scream at first. I simply stood there, my hand pressed flat against the mattress, as if my child might materialize back into existence if I waited long enough. Then the scream came, and it came from somewhere so deep inside me, I didn't recognize my own voice. Mama Ngozi came running from her room, and here is the detail that still haunts me. She was already fully dressed at 6 in the morning, as though she had been waiting. "Where is my son?" I screamed at her. "Where is Chidera?" She would not give me a straight answer. She kept saying only, "He is safe, Ada. He is safe. Do not look for him. Please do not look for him." I grabbed her, shook her, demanded a name, a place, anything, and she would not give it. It was only hours later, when the police arrived and pressed her formally, that she finally gave a story at all. And even then, it was not the whole truth. She told the officers and told the gathering neighbors who had crowded into the compound that she had sold the child to a stranger from Onitsha for 300,000 naira, that the woman had already left the city, that there was no way to trace her. It was a story built to travel fast, to reach certain ears quickly, to convince anyone watching, anyone connected to Kelechi, that the child was gone, sold off, no longer a factor in anything. It was never meant to be the truth. It was meant to be heard. I did not know that yet. All I knew, standing in that compound with dust in my mouth and 4 women holding me down after I collapsed, was that my son was gone and the woman responsible for it was refusing to say where. When I could finally speak coherently, I called Emeka, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, and I told him what his mother had done. There was silence on the line for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, flat and terrifyingly calm, "I am coming home now." He was 3 hours away in Wari. He drove through the morning traffic and the checkpoints without stopping. And when he finally walked into the compound, he did not even look at me first. He walked straight to his mother, who was sitting on the veranda with her rosary in her hands, praying as though the world had not just fallen apart around her. And he asked her one question: why? And this is where the story stops being simple. Because what Mama Ngozi said next was not a confession of greed. It was something far stranger and far more dangerous. And it would take days, days of terror, of searching, of a mystery that nearly tore our family apart completely before we understood what she truly meant. She said, "I did not sell him for money, Emeka. I told everyone I did so that whoever was watching this house would believe it. But I did not sell your son. I hid him." Now, before I continue, I want to pause here and say something to you watching this. If you have ever been in a family where the people who were supposed to protect you instead became the ones you feared, you understand exactly the storm inside me in that moment. Grief and rage and confusion all fighting for the same space in my chest. If this story is already gripping you, don't scroll away. Hit that subscribe button now, because I promise you, the deepest part of this story, the part that would genuinely shock you, is still ahead. Let's continue. The police who had already been called that morning did not leave. They stayed, and their questioning sharpened, because a woman claiming to have sold a child and then reversing her story within the same hour is not something any officer takes lightly. They kept Mama Ngozi at the compound for hours, pressing her, and slowly, reluctantly, sitting on a plastic chair in her own sitting room with her rosary still wound around her fingers, she told us the real story. She said that 2 months earlier, a man had come to the compound while Emeka was away on a shorter work trip. She did not know him, but he claimed to be sent by Kelechi. He told her plainly, without threat in his voice, which she said made it more frightening, not less, that if the child, Chidera, remained the recognized firstborn grandson tied to the family land document once Emeka finalized the paperwork, there would be complications for everyone involved. He did not say the word harm. He did not need to. Mama Ngozi said she understood the language of quiet threats. She had grown up in a village where such things were common currency, spoken in riddles precisely so that no one could ever be arrested for saying them plainly. She said she did not tell Emeka because she feared he would confront Kelechi directly and put himself in danger, or worse, that he would dismiss it as nothing, the way he'd once dismissed Kelechi's visits to the family lawyer. So she made a decision that she believed, rightly or wrongly, was the only way to protect her grandson, to make him disappear before whoever was watching the family could act on their threat. Not sold, hidden. With her own cousin's daughter, a woman named Nkechi, across the city in a quiet compound where no one would think to look, and no money, not 1 naira, ever changed hands between them. The story of the sale, the 300,000 naira, the vanished stranger from Onitsha, all of it was a performance staged for exactly one audience, whoever Kelechi had watching that house. I told even you a story I knew would break your heart because I could not risk you looking at me and knowing the truth on your face. If Kelechi's man ever asked you where your son was, Ada, I needed your fear to be real so that your answer would be real too. I do not know whether to believe her. Even then, grief has a way of making you suspicious of even the truth because you no longer trust that the world operates on truth at all. But there was something in the way she said Nkechi's name, some specific texture of certainty that made Emeka lean forward. "Take us to her now," he said.
We drove to the other side of the city that same evening, under 2 hours through Enugu's darkening streets. None of us speaking, the silence in that car thicker than smoke. I sat in the back seat with my arms wrapped around myself, rehearsing over and over what I would say to my son when I saw him again, if I saw him again. Terrified that even this explanation was another layer of lie, that we were driving toward more disappointment, more emptiness. We arrived at a small compound just before nightfall. Mama Ngozi knocked on a gate with trembling hands. A woman answered, younger than me, plump, kind-faced, startled to see 3 exhausted, wild-eyed people standing at her gate. And there, in a cot in the corner of a modest sitting room lit by a single dim bulb, was my son. I will not try to describe to you what that moment felt like, because there are no words in English or Igbo that could hold it properly. I simply remember falling to my knees on that cold cement floor and gathering him into my arms. And he woke, and he looked at me, and I promise you this is true, he smiled, as though he had known all along that I would come. But the story does not end there, because peace, once broken in a family, does not simply return because a child is found. There was still Kelechi. There was still the threat that had sent Mama Ngozi into that desperate, misguided act in the first place. And there was still the question none of us could answer that night. Was the danger truly over, or had we only found our son without yet finding safety? This is the part of the story where I want you to understand something about my husband. Because Emeka is not a man of quick anger. He is patient, deliberate, the kind of man who thinks 3 steps ahead before he speaks even one word. But when we returned home with Chidera sleeping against my chest, something in him had shifted permanently. He did not sleep that first night. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, going through old documents, his father's will, the correspondence with the construction company, the road project notices, the lawyer's letters, piecing together methodically exactly what Kelechi stood to gain and exactly how far he might be willing to go to gain it. What he found chilled both of us. Under the terms of their father's will, if Emeka's line, meaning specifically if Chidera as the recognized firstborn grandson was formally registered as beneficiary alongside Emeka, Kelechi's claim to any portion of that land, a claim he had been quietly building through lawyers and half-truths for over a year, would be permanently extinguished. Kelechi was not simply greedy. Kelechi was, according to the documents Emeka found, already deeply in debt to men in Port Harcourt whose names, when Emeka mentioned them to a contact inside the same police division still investigating the case, made the officer visibly uneasy. Kelechi needed that land, and a baby standing between him and it was to men like that a problem to be solved rather than a life to be honored. The original police report, the one opened that Tuesday morning when the whole compound believed a child had been sold, did not close. It simply widened. Emeka, working with the same officers now assigned to the case and quietly funding a private investigator with money borrowed from his employer, spent the following weeks turning that single report into something much larger. A paper trail connecting Kelechi to the man who had threatened his mother and to the debts that made him dangerous in the first place. Weeks passed. Emeka installed better locks, hired a night guard for the compound, and for the first time in our marriage, I understood real fear. The kind that lives behind your ribs and never fully leaves. The kind that makes you check a sleeping baby's chest for breath 3, 4, 5 times before you can close your own eyes. Now, before we go further into what happened next, because what happened next is the part of this story that even I still find difficult to explain in purely logical terms, I want to say this. If you've made it this far, you clearly love a story with layers, a story that doesn't hand you easy answers. That's exactly the kind of story we tell on this channel every week. So if you haven't already, subscribe now, because the ending of this one is going to leave you speechless. 3 weeks after Chidera came home, on a Sunday morning, Mama Ngozi insisted we all attend a special church service. Not our usual parish, but a small prayer house on the outskirts of town, led by an old woman everyone called Mama Prophetess Rebecca, a woman my mother-in-law had quietly consulted throughout her life for guidance in moments of crisis. I had always been skeptical of such places, raised in a more conventional Anglican tradition, but grief and fear had worn down my resistance to almost everything by then. I would have tried anything that promised even a sliver of protection for my son.
The service was small, maybe 30 people, crammed into a zinc-roofed building with plastic chairs and a single electric fan struggling against the heat. Mama Prophetess Rebecca was an elderly woman, perhaps 80, with cloudy eyes that nonetheless seemed to see more than most people's clear ones. Midway through the service, without any of us having told her a single detail of what we'd been through, she stopped mid-sermon, walked directly to where we sat, and placed her hand on Chidera. "This child," she said, her voice carrying strangely across the small room, "is marked twice, once by wickedness and once by mercy. The hand that tried to hide him from evil is not the hand that will save him fully. There is one more danger coming, close, very close, from someone who smiles at your table. But God has already written the ending of this story before the danger even begins. Watch. Do not fear. Watch." I will be honest with you. I do not know what to make of prophecy, and I will not pretend this story is here to convince you of anything you don't already believe. But I will tell you what happened 4 days later, because it happened almost exactly as she said, and I have turned it over in my mind 1,000 times since. 4 days later, Kelechi came to the house. He arrived unannounced in a black SUV, dressed impeccably, all warm smiles and expensive cologne, carrying gifts, a large teddy bear for Chidera, a box of provisions for the household, a gesture so ordinary, so performed, that it made the hair on my arms rise the moment he stepped through the gate. Emeka, calm as ever on the surface, invited him to sit. Mama Ngozi's hands trembled visibly as she brought out chilled Fanta and small chops, the ordinary rituals of Nigerian hospitality, performed under the extraordinary weight of what we all now knew. Kelechi spoke of family, of unity, of how the recent unfortunate incident, his words, delivered with such smoothness it made my skin crawl, had shown him how important it was for the family to come together. He spoke of wanting to visit more often, of wanting to be part of Chidela's life, of perhaps helping to formalize the paperwork around the land so that everyone's interests could be properly aligned. Every sentence was a knife wrapped in silk. And here is the moment, the exact moment where this story takes its final turn, the one I promised you at the very beginning. Emeka, without raising his voice, without a single flicker of the rage I knew was simmering beneath his calm exterior, reached into a folder beside his chair and placed a stack of documents on the table between them. Bank transfers Kelechi had made to a man now known to police as an enforcer in Port Harcourt. A signed statement from that same man taken during the investigation Emeka had spent the past weeks quietly building alongside the officers still handling the case. Records tying that same enforcer to the visit Mama Ngozi described, the one that had started all of this. "I know what you tried to do," Emeka said, still calm, still terrifyingly composed. "I know about the man you sent to threaten my mother. I know about your debts. And I know that 2 officers from the same division investigating this case since the morning my son disappeared are parked outside this compound right now, waiting for my signal." Kelechi's face, I am told, because I was in the kitchen at that exact moment holding my son, unable to trust my own legs to carry me into that room, went the color of ash. He did not go quietly. There was shouting, threats, a brief and frightening moment where Kelechi lunged toward the cable as if to grab the documents, and Emeka, a man twice his brother's size, simply stood between him and the door until the officers came in. But he went. He was arrested that day on charges of criminal conspiracy and intimidation. Though, as with many cases involving money and influence in our country, the legal process that followed was long, complicated, and, I will be honest with you, did not end with the dramatic justice you might see in a film. Kelechi eventually settled with the family out of court, relinquishing all claim to the land permanently in exchange for the charges being reduced. It was not the ending I wanted, but it was an ending that gave my son safety. And in the end, that was the only justice I truly needed. Now, you might be wondering about Mama Ngozi. What happened to her? Did I forgive her? Did our relationship survive the fact that this woman, my son's own grandmother, had once let me believe, even for one unbearable day, that he was gone forever? I want to answer this honestly because I think many of you watching have complicated relationships with your own in-laws, your own mothers, people who have hurt you even while claiming to love you, and I don't think you deserve a simple, tidy answer. It took me many months to forgive her. Some days, even now, I look at her and feel the ghost of that morning, the empty cot, the scream that tore out of me, the hours of not knowing if the story she'd told the police was even true. That kind of fear leaves a residue that does not fully wash away, no matter how good the explanation turns out to be. I told her this plainly one evening months later, and she did not argue with me. She simply held my hand in hers, her eyes wet, and said, "I know I broke something in you that I cannot fully repair, Ada. I was wrong to let you carry that grief, even to protect him. I was so afraid of losing him that I forgot I might lose you too in a different way. I am asking you not to forgive me quickly, but to let me earn it slowly for as long as it takes." And she did earn it, slowly, in the small, unglamorous ways that real trust is rebuilt, showing up, telling the truth even when it was uncomfortable, never again keeping a secret from me about anything, however small. Today, 5 years later, she is one of the most important people in Chidera's life and in my own. Not because the wound fully disappeared, but because she chose every single day since to prove that her love for that boy was never in question, only her judgment in that one terrible moment about how far she was willing to let me suffer to keep him safe.
As for Nkechi, the woman who kept my son those 2 nights, she remains to this day one of my dearest friends. She tells me now that she almost refused Mama Ngozi's request, that something about the panic in the old woman's voice on the phone that night frightened her too. But she agreed because Mama Ngozi swore on her own life that the child was in real danger and needed to disappear only temporarily, only until it was safe. Nkechi says she barely slept those 2 nights she had Chidera in her care, terrified of what she'd agreed to, praying over that sleeping child every hour, asking God to make it right. I believe in my heart that her prayers were part of what Prophetess Rebecca meant when she spoke of mercy walking alongside wickedness that night. Sometimes, the very people caught inside a terrible decision are also the ones quietly asking God to fix what they cannot.
I think about that Tuesday morning often. The emptiness of that court, the sound of my own scream. I think about how easy it would have been for that story to end differently, for Kelechi's plan to have succeeded in some darker version of these events, for Mama Ogozi's desperate gamble to have gone wrong, for Nkechi to have said no on the phone that night. So many small decisions made by frightened, flawed, ordinary people somehow arranged themselves into a path that led my son back into my arms. I do not know if you call that coincidence or providence. I know what I call it in my own heart, on the nights I still wake to check that he is breathing. Chidera is 6 years old now. He is loud where he was once quiet, stubborn where he was once calm, full of questions about dinosaurs and airplanes and why the sky doesn't fall down. He does not remember any of this. He will not remember the morning his own uncle tried to erase him from a family's future, or the grandmother who let me believe the worst to save his life, or the stranger across the city who prayed over him like he was her own. One day, when he's older, I will tell him this story in full, the way I have told it to you tonight. And I will tell him what I have come to believe with my whole chest, that sometimes the people who fail us and the people who save us are standing in the very same room, wearing the very same face, and that the difference between disaster and deliverance is often thinner than we think, thin enough that only God's hand, quietly working behind our worst mistakes, can hold the pieces together until we understand what we were actually looking at all along. If this story touched something in you tonight, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in the middle, wondering how it would end, that is exactly why I make these videos. Real stories, told honestly, about the families we come from, and the love that survives even our worst moments. If you want more stories like this one, stories that don't let you go until the very last word, subscribe to this channel right now, turn on the notification bell, and I promise you, I will keep bringing you the kind of storytelling that stays with you long after the video ends. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying till the end. And until next time, hold your loved ones a little closer tonight. You never know whose prayers are quietly working on your behalf.